Hey everyone! In the last video, we talked about the big story of the Old Testament. We saw how the story began with God creating a good world, how humans rebelled, and how God made a promise that one day a rescuer would come to defeat evil and restore everything. The Old Testament ends with people waiting for a king, waiting for the rescuer God promised. And that's exactly where the New Testament begins. The New Testament starts with a story of a man named Jesus. Jesus was born in the land of Israel, the same place where the Old Testament story took place. And right from the beginning, the writers of the New Testament want us to know something very important. Jesus is the promised king. He comes from the family line of King David, just like God promised long ago. But Jesus doesn't look like the kind of king people expected. He wasn't rich. He didn't lead an army. He didn't live in a palace. Instead, Jesus traveled from town to town teaching people about something called the kingdom of God. The kingdom of God means the world as God intended it to be, a world where God's love, justice, and goodness rule. Jesus told stories called parables to help people understand what this kingdom was like. He said the kingdom of God is like a tiny mustard seed that grows into a huge tree. He said it's like a treasure hidden in a field. In other words, God's kingdom might start small, but it will grow into something amazing. But Jesus didn't just talk about God's kingdom. He showed people what it looked like. He healed sick people. He welcomed outsiders. He forgave sinners. He fed the hungry. Everywhere Jesus went, broken things started getting healed. It was like little previews of the world God promised to restore. But not everyone liked what Jesus was doing. Some of the religious leaders felt threatened by him. They didn't like that Jesus challenged their authority and exposed their hypocrisy. And the Roman rulers didn't like people talking about a new king. So together, they made a plan to stop him. Jesus was arrested, put on trial, and sentenced to die on a cross. Now this seems like the worst possible ending. If Jesus was the promised king, how could he die? But the New Testament tells us that this was actually part of God's plan. Remember the problem that started back in the garden? Humans choosing their own way instead of trusting God? That problem is called sin, and it has spread to every part of the world. Jesus came to deal with that problem. When he died on the cross, Jesus took the weight of human sin and evil upon himself. But the story doesn't end with the cross. 3 days later, something happened that changed everything. Jesus rose from the dead. The resurrection showed that sin and death did not win. God raised Jesus to life, proving that he really is the promised king and the true rescuer of the world. After his resurrection, Jesus appeared to his followers and gave them an important mission. He told them to go into the world and tell everyone the good news. The good news that through Jesus, God's kingdom has begun and everyone can be a part of it. This mission is what the rest of the New Testament is all about. In the book of Acts, we see Jesus' followers spreading the message about him all over the world. They travel to new cities and tell people about Jesus' life, death, and resurrection. And as people believe this message, new communities begin to form. These communities are called churches. The rest of the New Testament contains letters written to these churches. These letters help followers of Jesus learn how to live as citizens of God's kingdom. They teach people how to love one another, forgive each other, care for the poor, and reflect the lives that Jesus always wanted his followers to have. But the New Testament story still isn't finished. The very last book is called Revelation. Revelation is full of powerful images and symbols that point to the future. It shows that one day Jesus will return as king, evil will finally be defeated, and God will reign over the entire world. Everything broken is healed. God will live with his people, and creation will become the good and beautiful place God always intended it to be. So the New Testament tells the next chapter in the Bible's big story. The Old Testament was waiting for the rescuer. The New Testament reveals that Jesus is the rescuer, and through Jesus, God's plan to restore the world has already begun. And that means the story of the Bible isn't just something that happened long ago. It's a story we're invited to be part of today.